Can you just explain, because I was watching a lot of the hearing in my office before I came up here, and you talked about global slack a couple of times. Can you explain to me what that really means?
The thought is that it has become, over the last 30, 40 years during our adult lifetime, possible to make just about anything, just about anywhere. Technology has enabled that, and rising living standards and capabilities in emerging market countries has created that opportunity. And the thought is that that capacity outside the United States is, in a sense, a form of slack, so that if you're, for example, a worker bargaining for higher wages, you're held back by this overhang of knowing that you can lose your job and that kind of thing. The issue is that globalization, most measures of globalization sort of plateaued out about at the time of the crisis, and yet it doesn't. That story makes a lot of intuitive sense, but it doesn't actually link up very well with the path of wages over the past few years. So it's something we've looked at, and it gets written about a lot.
Actually, I think that's a very important point, because there's a lot of latent productivity that could be globally deployed, that as we talk about wages and we want to do a good job of moving wages in the right direction, they reach a certain point to where where we could plateau again, because that capacity, that capability to deliver could go outside of our jurisdiction. I think it's a very important point. On productivity, a couple of years ago, I met with former Chair Greenspan, and he was talking about the one thing that he was most concerned with at this time was the kind of static growth in capital investment. And he was saying, a healthy percentage of GDP is somewhere around 8%, and we were trending down in the 4% range. Do you view that as a key indicator that we have to increase? And what, if any, trends are you seeing that give you some sense that we're getting to a healthy percentage of capital investment as a percentage of GDP?
We don't know how to predict productivity growth very well, but we do think it links up over time with things like investment in people, but also investment in plant and equipment, R&D, and that kind of thing. So, unfortunately, what the financial crisis did was it generated very weak demand conditions for a long time, and that created weak investment, and that itself then furthers weak demand. So it's kind of a bad self-reinforcing cycle that we had there for a while. That's why it is so heartening to see business investment moving up last year, and perhaps continuing a strong performance this year is our expectation. It is ultimately only productivity that raises living standards, and investment is one of the keys. Not just investment in plant and equipment, but certainly in the skills and aptitudes of our people as well.
Do you get a sense that what we've done with tax reform is a potential positive contributor to seeing that investment move up?
I do think it's a potential positive contributor in the sense that when you lower the corporate tax rate, you lower the user cost of capital. Like you, I've spent a lot of time working with private sector companies, and that's one of the factors they consider. It's not the only factor, but lower user cost of capital is something that should spur more investment over time, and that should add to productivity. Hard to quantify, but I think it's there.
And you and I talked about this once or twice in my office, and in my remaining time, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the job that Mr. Quarles has, and post-crisis regulatory right-sizing. Be interested in your thoughts on Basel IV and regulatory tailoring. And I know people ask you, I was watching in my office, the committee, I think some ask you about the banking regulatory reform bill that passed out of here, which provides some regulatory and I think responsible regulatory relief for a portion of our banking sector. But what more can we expect to see that are within your lanes and in your authorities on right-sizing regulations? The other thing I remember with Mr. Greenspan, he said the most troubling job creation growth that he saw was, at that time, this was 2 or 3 years ago, post-crisis, about 300,000 jobs that have been created under the title of regulatory reform, which in my world, that's by definition a non-productive job. So I'm kind of curious to see how are we going to get to a more tailored, I think Senator Perdue asked this question, how are we going to get to a more tailored more reasonable regulatory burden on this industry that still manages the risk that you have to be concerned with?
You know, I think our concern is to maintain and strengthen, but make more efficient the big improvements we think we made after the crisis. That's higher capital, higher liquidity, stress testing, and resolution planning. And those are going to apply and continue to apply to the largest, most complex institutions in the strongest form. Our effort then is to tailor that at every level as we move down and make sure, and we did a lot of tailoring along the way, but we're now going back through each level to make sure that we got that tailoring just about right. Not everything that we need the 8 systemically important institutions to do needs to be done by every bank. And many of them have much simpler business models that are much more traditional banking, and a different regulatory strictures should apply to those companies. So it's something we're working on.
Mr. Chair, the only thing I would say, or Mr. Chairman, the only thing I would say is somebody who worked in a firm that helped prepare CCAR and stress test results, it still is unimaginable to me how a properly tailored environment could result in 60 and 100,000 page submissions. There's got to be a better way to do it, even at the high end of the spectrum. And I just look forward to you all continuing to look at it and manage the risk, but right size it.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.